Welcome committee members. Welcome committee members and members of the public to this July 19th, 2023 Governor's Workforce Development Board Executive Committee meeting. For the record, my name is Hugh Anderson, Chairman of the Governor's Workforce Development Board. Katie, will you please take roll call, confirm a quorum, and verify posting?
Sure thing, Mr. Chair. Okay, so we have Chair Anderson,
Here.
Vice Chair Evans.
Present.
I'm here.
We have Jerry Merritt. Crystal Slaughter.
Present.
Rob Benner. Lisa Levine. Mr. Chair, Lisa informed me she'd be absent prior to the meeting. And Councilman Black, Mr. Chair, Councilman Black informed me he'd be absent prior to the meeting. As of right now, we don't have a quorum. We are missing just one for quorum. We want to wait a minute. Oh, I see Jerry right here in the waiting room. So I'll just give her a second. Hey, Jerry Merritt, can you mark yourself present for roll call, please?
Present.
Great, thank you. Okay, Mr. Chair, Katie Gilbertson, Governor's Office Workforce Innovation. For the record, I hereby affirm that we now have a quorum for the July 19th, 2023 Governor's Workforce Development Board Executive Committee meeting, and I further affirm that the agenda and notice for this meeting were properly posted pursuant to NRS 241020.
Thank you, Katie. And before we proceed, the chair kindly requests that anybody who speaks today to identify yourself for the record. So continuing on to item number 4, public comments. Members of the public on remote technology are invited to provide comments at this time. No action may be taken on any matters during public comments until the matter itself has been included on an agenda as an item for possible action. Are there any public comments on the telephone or Zoom? Seeing any, Katie? None? All right. Moving on to agenda item number 5. Is there any discussion before I call for a motion to approve the May 10th, 2023 Executive Committee minutes? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Jerry Merritt.
For the record.
Thank you, Jerry. Is that a second, Ken?
Yes, sir.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. All right, moving on to agenda item number 6 for possible action. The chair recognizes Janice Klein, ESD Program Chief from DETR, to discuss the revisions to State Compliance Policy 5.10, transition to paperless electronic files. Janice, welcome.
Thank you. Janice Klein for the record. State Compliance Policy 5.10 is a brand new policy. It addresses the guidance for the local boards, the CEOs, these elected officials, and employee and career hubs, gives them uniform paperless documentation of participant files and gives them instructions and guidance on how to do that. The Section 185 of Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act requires recipients of Title I funds to keep records that are sufficient to prepare reports and permit the tracing of expenditures to adequately ensure the funds haven't been spent unlawfully. The guidance applies to electronic file storage and document imaging standards in the administration of the following programs: WIOA, Wagner-Peiser, Trade Adjustment Assistance, and related assistance programs. Standardizing the collection of participant information expedites participant eligibility determination and allows the employee and VHUBs more time to focus on providing services to customers. The guidance provides instructions for collection, dissemination, storage, and protection of information contained within the digital files. So I'll try and keep this as succinct as possible. The actual employee NV is the system of record with regular regard to federal reporting for WIOA Title I programs, youth, adult, dislocated worker, again, Wagner-Peiser, Title III, trade adjustment, and other grant-funded programs in Nevada. in addition to state-funded programs. And currently, Employee MV is used to capture information on enrollment, service delivery, and performance data. The required documentation used to verify program eligibility and support service provision must be maintained in Employee NV. On page 2, Katie, it discusses the electronic case files and actually outlines the policy and procedure on how to do this. Title I service providers have to record and document activities for all participants enrolled in WIOA, youth, adult, dislocated worker programs, Wagner-Pfizer, trade, and discretionary grant programs in Employee NV to ensure compliance with federal and state statutes, regulations, and policies. Employee NV eliminates the need for paper applications for participant registration and ensures that the local workforce development boards are using identical criteria to determine participant eligibility. In order to case manage, the local workforce development boards and the Employee NV career hubs must use Employee NV to create applications for participants, record program services, upload supporting documentation to verify eligibility, provide case notes regarding interactions with participants to include information as to who, what, when, where, why, and how of service delivery. The use of electronic records eliminates the need for storage in the offices, saves supply of costs, decrease paper waste, provides an easy, accessible single point of access for file review, reduces staff time assessing hard copy documentation, eliminates lost or misfiled paper documents. Electronic records are made available to any staff from the US DOL ETA, state auditor, or WIS program monitor staff who require access to carry out their official duties. Information is made available by granting access to Employee NV after completing the system access form. The next one is related to fiscal documentation. Any requirement to upload fiscal related documentation would be at the local workforce development board's discretion. However, Employee NV is not intended to be the system of record for fiscal documentation. Paper files may be required. All participant related payments must be entered in the related voucher and noted on the invoice and using other specific identifiers in Employee NV case notes. Copies of the case notes and receipts must be uploaded into the participant file of record, which allows for ease of reference during monitoring and review. The next section talks about timely data entry into Employee NV. All applicants have to be processed upon the customer receiving services same day. However, there are times where documents cannot be brought in at the same time the customer is in the office. So to address the impact and delayed data entry of all transactions, we've given a requirement of 14 business days in order for all of this to be completed. Everything to be entered in the system, documents to be uploaded. And then the actual local boards have the ability to create a tag if they choose to impose a lesser time period. But our requirement that we're asking for is 14 business days. All eligibility intake information and documentation has to be uploaded into Employee NV upon receipt. Local Workforce Development Board compliance within 14 business day rule will be reviewed by the WIOA compliance monitors, and instances of non-compliance will be included in the monitoring report as a finding. Katie, on page 4, documentation uploads. Staff also can tag uploaded documents with keywords, which will allow the documents to be found using a keyword search. And that ensures consistency. The local area staff will follow the name tagging conventions outlined in attachment 1, WIOA title Employee NV document naming conventions. The case notes are a plan tool and a source of documentation and information that are used by case managers, supervisors, and monitors. WIOA files can be chosen for review by multiple entities such as DOL ETA, DETR auditor, WIS monitoring staff, Governor's Workforce Development Board, local workforce development boards, and other organizations. Therefore, accuracy and completeness in case notes are very important. Case notes, again, are going to tell who, what, when, where, why, and how of the customer's needs and services have been satisfied up to this date, whatever the date is. Case notes describe the action taken and the reasons behind those actions, along with the expected results. The case notes sections should not have opinions or comments of the case manager should be included. Anyone with approved access should be able to pick up the file and follow the story of what's happening with the client. It's important that there is factual information, no opinions. On page 5, correcting any records that were entered wrong or incorrectly have to be requested by the Title I providers to the local workforce development boards for review. If the board can't make those corrections, then they have to email Dieter Wiss requesting that information either be corrected or removed. Wiss team will actually verify the validity of the correction and make sure that it doesn't affect any program outcomes. Under limited circumstances, staff are allowed to delete documents from a participant's electronic file, but for the most part, they have to go through their board or the Wiss Auto team. As far as confidentiality of data or information and required release forms, it shan't be disclosed by any agency in identifiable form or other than the exclusively statistical purposes. The use of the information is prohibited except with the informed consent of the respondent. All providers will have a release of information form signed and dated by the participant and the case manager. The form shall state that the participant's information may be used for reporting purposes because of federal regulations associated with the benefit of federal funds, and that the participant's personnel information will remain confidential. The release form will be uploaded into the participants file in Employee NV to validate that the participant agrees to the release of information for reporting purposes. Personal identifiable information is defined as either protective or non-sensitive. Protective PII is information that's sensitive and typically includes information like social security numbers, birth date, bank account numbers. Non-sensitive information is personal information that when released by its shelf should not be harmful to the individual. The handling of PII should be done with caution and follow federal guidance, and it references TEGL 39-11. Section B of this talks about medical disability records, medical and disability related information, also known as protected health information under the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, must be kept confidential and separate from Employee NV electronic case records. Such information will be kept in a paper file in a secured, locked location. And then pages 7 through 12 really just give guidance on the tags, instructions on how to enter case notes, how to tag it so it's appropriately identified, and it's pretty detailed information for all of the caseworkers to follow. So this policy is so that the offices can go to a paperless digital system rather than necessarily having to have everything in a file. So we're asking that this be approved so that it can be presented to the full board and be ratified.
Thank you, Janice. Does anybody have any questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Evans.
for Ken Evans for the record. I guess my only question would be, is my understanding is that there's going to be a chief technology officer or a similar position. Will that person be responsible or involved in this automation effort?
Not that I'm aware of, because this is really kind of taken care of between the local boards and how they disseminate the information to the providers. Some of the boards are already doing this. We just have never had a policy put in place, and we gave them until, I want to say, June 30th of this year to be able to get all their files transferred over. So this policy is a little bit late in coming, but they've been preparing this for, I want to say, close to 4 years now.
Okay, understood. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, ma'am.
Welcome.
Denise, this is Hugh Anderson for the record. So what you're saying is none of these departments have actually started the process? And if that's the case, how long do you estimate it's going to take for them to fully convert? Because obviously all of us who've gone through this know that productivity plummets when you're dealing with a new animal like this because it's pretty complex.
Right. Janice Klein for the record. Just to be clear, they have been doing paperless for, like I say, almost up to 4 years. We've
okay.
given them notification a long time ago that this is up and coming. And so some have actually been proactive and been doing it for a much longer time, but they had until June 30th of this year to get all of their files converted over. So to my knowledge, everything has been converted over, and our monitors will be going out in the next few months to make sure that that actually has happened with all of the paper files converted over to digital. So
My apologies. I misunderstood that. That's great. Okay, good. Any other questions before we proceed to a motion? So hearing none, hearing no further discussion, I'll call for a motion to approve.
Ken Evans for the record, so move.
Thank you, Ken.
Jerry Merritt, I was second.
Thank you, Jerry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Please let the record reflect that the motion carries. Well, Janice, we're going to put you to a lot of work today, as you already know. So let's move on to item number 7 for possible action. The chair recognizes Janice Klein, ESD Program Chief from Dieter, to discuss the revisions to State Compliance Policy 1.10, coordination of training funds with other financial assistance programs.
thank you, Janice Klein for the record. So this policy is a non-substantive change, but it does provide guidance in accordance with WIOA Section 1.34, outlining the requirements for coordination of training funds with other financial assistance programs. So this policy is really updating the WIA Act into WIOA. It also references TEGL 19-16, which was added as a reference, and it was not in the original policy, which was dated 2005. The policy is being revised for non-substantive changes to provide clear and concise guidance for the local Workforce Development Board, as well as the Governor's Workforce Development Board. The revision updates the formatting and reflects the original office's new name, Workforce Innovation Support Services. So everything highlighted here in yellow really is just housekeeping items. It updates WIS's name from Workforce Investment to Innovation. It replaces the WIA section into WIOA section 134, and then it lists the WIOA guidelines in the background. Page 2 changes local workforce investment board to development board. B shows providers must coordinate, and the very bottom of this second page, it refers to federal Pell Grants and then gives the CFR code. We're asking this be approved.
Thank you. Any questions? Hearing none, I'll call for a motion to approve.
Jerry Merritt for the record. I move that we approve.
Thank you, Jerry.
Ken Evans, second.
Thank you, Ken. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. All right, moving on to item number 8 for possible action. The chair recognizes Janice Klein, ESD Program Chief from Dieter, to discuss the revisions to State Compliance Policy 1.18, serving veterans and priority of service to veterans.
Thank you, Janice Klein, for the record. Chair, can I ask a quick question? If these are non-substantive changes, do they have to be approved by the executive committee?
I suspect not. Katie, do you have a read on that?
Yeah, Katie Gilbertson for the record. I mean, I have the bylaws up because we're gonna be talking about that later. So we have a vote to actually give the executive committee the authority to approve the non-substantive changes. Carlene, if you want to add on to that.
Carlene Johnson, for the record, Dieter. State Compliance Policy 5.9 covers any non-substantive changes do not have to be voted on by the executive committee nor the full board, but WIS does have to provide a detailed breakdown of what did change and why it changed for the board's edification, but you do not have to vote on it. So it should make this a little bit quicker for you.
Does anybody on the committee have any reservations about not voting on this?
No,
Ken Evans for the record, I do not.
Excellent. Janice, you can run through it then.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Janice Klein for the record, State Compliance Policy 1.18 basically goes over serving veterans, a priority of service to veterans. We updated Workforce Innovation Support Services. Page 1 also references many of the CFRs, any TEGL changes that have been added since this policy's inception. Page 2 discusses veterans and adult priority based on TEGL 19-16, which is an updated TEGL. Page 3 discusses the priority that has to be provided in the following order for veterans. And it lists first to veterans with eligible spouses, second to non-covered persons, third to veterans with eligible spouses that are not included in WIOA priority group, fourth priority populations established by the governor or the local workforce development board, and last non-covered persons outside groups given priority under WIOA. And it also discusses that veterans do not have to use their VA eligibility benefits in order to get additional assistance from WIOA funded services. The bottom of page 4, it lists the priority and special populations, citing the WIOA section 134. And then page 5 goes over TEGL 22-04 change 1 about military spouses, outlining military spouses who leave their job to follow his or her spouse to a new duty assignment can be served with dislocated worker formula grants in certain circumstances. And then on page 6, it kind of lists some of those circumstances, spouses that are generally not resuming employment with the same employer. If a spouse resumes employment in a new location, and occupations or jobs will not be necessarily the same structure or organizationally as the prior location. Military spouses do get jobs in their new locations as likely new employees. They start at lower levels of seniority than the levels of their position in their prior locations. So it gives you definition as to how you can make these individuals eligible for WIOA funding. Then again, bottom of page 6, again, just reinforces TEGL 19-6 and TEGL 22-4 change 1 as a reference. Page 7, TEGL 19-6. I mean, these are all updated TEGLs. And then page 8 and 9 go over veterans with significant barriers to employment and reference TEGL 4-16. And really, that's about it. There is a correction on page 9. The actual address for Owen is Goen. We'll fix that before we actually submit this for publication. But we're asking that be reviewed. They're non-substantive changes, just updating the TEGLs and the policy for veterans priority of service.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on item number 8?
Yeah, Chair Anderson, and I'll try not to have too many questions today, but in this case, were these priorities there before and we're just changing the language to match, or are these new priorities? And the only reason why I ask is because if these priorities weren't there before, then that kind of suggests it is a substantive change, unless I'm missing something.
No, they were not. they were here before. The problem is when a policy changes or, you know, we owe a guideline changes or a TEGL changes, it has to be updated in the policy. So when we do non-substantive changes, we are amending the TEGL, either it's been canceled or rescinded, updating the new TEGL in the policy, and sometimes stating some of that background information as to what applies to that TEGL is important. So it's
Okay,
not
fair enough.
changing how services were provided before. Sometimes it adds clarity.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm ready for the motion.
There's no motion required. We're high speed, low drag.
Oh, yeah.
Any other questions on
over.
item number 8? All right, hearing none, we're moving on to item number 9 for possible, to hear an update from Janice Klein, ESD Program Chief from Dieter, to discuss the revisions to state compliance policy 5.3, lobbying restrictions.
Okay, Janice Klein for the record. This policy is just really an update regarding restrictions on lobbying. It replaces WIA, section 5.3, which is now WIOA, section 194. It also gives guidance on publicity restrictions and updates WIOA section 195 from WIA. And that's it for this one.
Excellent. Any questions on that?
No.
All right. So we're moving on to item number 10 for Janice Klein to report from ESD Program Chief from Dieter to discuss the revisions to state compliance policy 5.7, oversight and monitoring.
Thank you, Janice Klein, for the record. Policy 5.7 really is just to update and add data element validation for Wagner Peyser's self-appraisal system. This was a finding that we had received when DOL did their monitoring back in September, and the policy needed to be entered into the monitoring policy. That's what this does. So we updated Governor's Workforce Development Board because this policy hasn't been updated for some time. We updated the TEGLs on page 1, 2319, change 1 and change 2. TEGL 7-18, 26-16, change 2. So throughout this policy are just updates, changing verbiage based on updating workforce investment to workforce innovation, changing grammatical errors that were in this policy. It lists starting on page 5. If it lists the CFR, it'll tell you the CFR pertains to monitoring and reporting or oversight roles. It didn't do that before. Basically, it just defines what each CFR captures. And then the actual, on page 10, reporting suspected fraud, abuse, and criminal conduct, that is already noted in SCP 5.2. So we just made that reference in this policy. And let me see. It's many pages to this one. Page 17 is where we entered the self-appraisal system, which was a requirement, but was never entered into this policy. So the self-appraisal system, Nevada's written procedure requires the SAS measure on a quarterly basis against planned services with reviews conducted yearly based on Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Title I and Title III program entries determine success in reaching state-entered employment and placement goals for participants, appropriateness of services provided to employers and participants, and then timeliness in service delivery to employers and participants. The procedures include identifying, documenting, addressing, and instituting a corrective action plan to rectify any deficiencies per 20 CFR 658.601. So this policy really does just insert SAS as part of the monitoring requirement that's required by the DOL. And again, it was a finding that we had, so we had to put it into this policy.
Any questions on item number 10?
Ken Evans, no.
Jerry Merritt, no.
Thank you. Hearing no other. Moving on to agenda item number 11, the chair recognizes Janice Klein, ESD Program Chief from Dieter, to discuss the revisions to State Compliance Policy 5.9, State Compliance Policy Procedure.
Thank you. Janice Klein for the record. Policy 5.9 discusses the actual policy creation and update procedures. One of the things that we did include in the update for this particular policy was a finding from the DOL for the same monitoring event. They wanted published for public comment any policy changes or compliance policy updates. They also wanted us to include state expected levels of performance. Once the negotiations have been done with the DOL, they wanted those published and be able to allow the public to comment. So this policy just basically inserts that on page 2, published for public comment. We do not, Nevada, we could not find a sunshine provision. And until NRS actually either creates one, WIS will request that the Governor's Workforce Development Board, the local workforce development boards, DETR, and Nevada's public libraries post these documents for 14 business days on their website. It allows the public to make comments within that 14 business days, and they will email any public comment they have to DETR WIOA at deter.nv.gov. And that should satisfy that finding.
Excellent. Any questions on that item?
Yeah, clarification question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, for example, what we're going through this afternoon will have to be posted and give people 14 business days to review it. Did I interpret that correctly?
Well,
Ken Evans.
the way Janice Klein for the record, the way that I see it is that this hasn't actually been enforced yet. So I'm thinking moving forward, anything that we do will have to be published and be allowed the public to comment.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none. Thank you very much, Janice. We appreciate all the input
Thank you.
and the suggestion that we don't have to vote on it.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to item number 12 for possible action. I will present some revisions to the Governor's Workforce Development Board bylaws. The two changes to the bylaws can be found in section 4.1.4, which outlines the duties of the executive committee, and section 4.3, which relates to subcommittees. Both proposed revisions add clarifying language as to the responsibilities of the GWDB committees. The first change in sections 4.1.4 explicitly adds that the executive committee has the authority to vote on and approve any non-substantive changes to SCPs instead of requiring the full board approval. The second change in section 4.3 formally adds details to the formation, structure, and meeting schedule of the subcommittees. I want to assure everyone that creating a membership cap for the subcommittees is not intended to discourage engagement in the subcommittees, but rather to streamline the voting process and establish a government structure similar to the full board and executive committee. The final vote to revise the bylaws will be taken at the next full board meeting on August 16th. Does anybody on the call have any questions for me? Hearing none. I'll call for a motion to approve.
Crystal Slaughter for the record. I make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Crystal. Do I hear a second?
Ken Evans, second.
Thank you, Ken. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Please let the record reflect that the motion carries. So we're going to move on to agenda item number 13 for discussion and information only. The chair recognizes Katie Gilbertson, who's going to discuss the presentation on AB 98.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Katie Gilbertson for the record. So Lisa's not gonna be able to join us today, but I'm just gonna give a quick update on Assembly Bill 98, which was introduced and passed in the last legislative session that wrapped up last month. And so basically AB 98, it was sponsored by Assemblyman Wynn and signed into law by Governor Lombardo. It revises language under NRS 232.935, which does two things. It updates the NRS language to reflect that the board is titled the Governor's Workforce Development Board, not the Investment Board, like Janice mentioned earlier in the CPs. And it also revises language regarding the Governor's Workforce Development Board's industry sector councils. So previously there were regional sector councils that were held at GOIN, or there were regional sector councils and then statewide sector councils that were housed within GOIN. So in Southern Nevada, Workforce Connections has the industry sector councils, and they have 7 that are up and running currently. They were established pursuant to the region's comprehensive economic development strategy, or their CEDS. The sector partnerships elevate relevant and timely discussions on in-demand occupations and sectors as it pertains to strengthening Nevada's workforce development system. In Northern Nevada, the industry sector councils are housed at Nevada Works, and they were established with the Good Jobs Grant Challenge that was awarded to them last year. Their plan and efforts are underway to establish and launch 4 regional industry sector councils as well. So putting them at the regional level allows for our bottom-up approach for information sharing the workforce development issues and opportunities to flow up to the government channels. This promotes industry sector private leaders to elevate their concerns and needs rather than the government making decisions in a vacuum at the top. This law removes GOIN's competing statewide sector councils and strengthens their relationship between the regional sector councils and the Governor's Workforce Development Board. This will increase collaboration and cooperation between the state and regional workforce development organizations, will strengthen alignment between workforce development agencies, and it will reduce duplication and competition.
Thank you, Katie. Does anyone have any questions for Katie on that item? All right. Moving on to item number 15 for discussion and information only. The chair would like to, I'm sorry, 14, excuse me. I'm jumping ahead. For discussion and information only, the chair recognizes WIOA Title II State Director Nancy Olson and Business Process Analyst 2 from Adult Education Ariana Florence to give an update on the state plan and discuss the progress with the executive committee.
Good afternoon, Nancy Olson for the record. Unfortunately, Ariana will not be joining us. She is being a good mother and going to pick up her son. So you got me. So the work has continued on the state plan update. So what I'm going to do is just quickly go through kind of where we are in the process and give you a little bit more information about what we've done so far. So the main goal with the state plan that is due in March of 24 is to move the state plan from a compliance document to more of a cohesive strategic plan. The previous versions of the state plan have largely been addressed by each individual title and core partner answering questions independently. So we are taking that and revising most of the sections to allow for a system response instead of individual titles. So the progress at this point, we've discussed and developed 3 overarching goals. Those overarching goals were approved by the subcommittee for strategic planning. Katie was nice enough to set up a Google site for us so that every member of the work group can get into the same document. We divided up the joint portion of the state plan by sections and then set up a tracking sheet for the revisions so that each person on the work group can go in and see where the process is for each section. And then members of the work group mostly volunteered to work on revising sections. There were a couple voluntold, but mostly it was a volunteer process. The goals that we identified and that were voted on by the subcommittee were meant to be overarching goals that would then set the stage for more specific goals and measurements within separate documents that were much shorter than the almost 300 pages of the state plan to be used by the board and core partners. So, and I apologize for the amount of text on these next 3 slides, but this is the first goal along with strategies underneath that goal and possible measurements underneath that goal. This is not, it could change slightly from this point. The goal itself, as I mentioned, has been voted on by the subcommittee, but the strategies and measurements could be altered slightly. One of the things that has happened with previous versions of the state plan is that there has not been any organized method of determining the progress towards implementation. So when we talk about the strategies and the measurements, we want to make sure that there's a method of looking at progress towards implementation so that it won't be just measurements that are numeric, but measurements that could say, you know, out of 5 steps towards implementation of establishing common practice on collecting barriers, for instance, that we are on step 3. So that way we've got a real measure of the progress, not just waiting until we measure an outcome. The second overarching goal involves the alignment of services between partners and really stresses reducing the duplication of effort. One thing that I have long desired is that we identify who does it best out of the core partners, and therefore try to steer the services in such a way that there's not a duplication and there's not multiple partners doing the same thing and maybe not doing it as well. And for the record, I'm not sure if Katie sent this PowerPoint out to the group, but it is available for the group so that you don't have to worry about trying to read through every word very quickly.
Hi, Nancy. Yeah, it was sent out just to confirm, and it's on the website too as a meeting attachment. Maybe
Great.
let's look at it.
Thank you. Thank you. And then the third overarching goal is collaboration. And so in addition to identifying the best practices and the services that, core partners are providing and reducing duplication, we also want to make sure that the collaboration is taking place. And so that's where we really get into the referrals and common intake, integrated data sharing, all those kind of things, including braided funding. So again, let me emphasize that these are meant to be overarching goals. They are not meant to be so specific to fit the criteria for a SMART goal. We're looking at the measurements and the strategies to be informing the development of those SMART goals that would be pulled out from the state plan for use by both the board and the core partners. And the tentative timeline, I did not change this, Katie, after I got your email, but this pretty much reflects what I sent you earlier today. So we're looking at the approval from the full board for a draft in the October meeting, then post the plan for public comment, make any adjustments, and have the final approval in February, in time to have a couple of weeks to work on entering the plan into the required WIOA portal, in time for the deadline that will be published by the DOL and USDOE. In the past, it has been the first week in March. So it can be anytime between like March 1st and 6th, I think. The only exception to that was the first year in 2016, when they did push it by about a month because of their delay in publishing guidance. And with that, I will be happy to take any questions.
Who has questions for Nancy?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Evans.
not so much a question as I wanted to make sure on the record I gave a couple of compliments where praise is due on the official record. First and foremost, Subcommittee Chair Olson, I want to say thank you very much for your leadership and facilitation, along with Ariana for moving us through this. From my perspective, you've more than met the mark so far in terms of doing three key things. Number one, coming up with a document that is a bit more concise, even as it still maintains its compliance and comprehensive aspect. Number two, coming up with goals that are overarching that we can actually implement and work on to come up with a more professionally and culturally competent system that stays focused on the front end awareness and access for the client, and then on the back end, trying to put people in the positions and preferably positions with livable wages. And then number three, even as we're meeting the compliance aspect for the U.S. Department of Labor, I feel pretty confident we're going to end up with a 2 to 3 page document that's built on the foundation of the 3 goals that you publicized, so that we'll have a working document that we can work with throughout the year and in coming years. So again, I wanted to make sure that I gave you praise as the leader, and then I definitely want to say thank you to all the team and subcommittee participants, because they've all been of a mindset and a spirit to make sure that we accomplish these 3 things. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. And Nancy Olson, for the record, thank you, Ken, very much. And I want to publicly acknowledge the hard work of the entire work group that has volunteered in some cases to work on 3 or 4 sections of the state plan. So that's no small task. So thank you very much.
Does anybody else have any questions for Nancy? Nancy Hugh Anderson, for the record, I too want to commend you on this document. It is, it's clear, concise, and to the point. And my only question to you is, what can we as the board do to make sure that we have the proper, well, you're putting the proper measurements in place. How do we make sure that we can extract that data in real time on an ongoing basis to, be effective in implementing the plan?
Thank you, Nancy Olson, for the record. I think largely we have data that has never been reported to the board. So for instance, as far as Nevada Works tracks referrals from one program to another, and that's reported on a weekly basis, but that's never been reported to the board. So there's a lot of data there that goes over and above the federal performance measures. And so I think the board can help with identifying those data elements, and the measurements that we're talking about in the state plan. We can take that and the board can help to identify of that what should be reported to the board on a regular basis.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item 15. Which is, it was there a minute ago until somebody pressed a button. There we go. For discussion and information only, the chair would like to see if there is any new business from the executive committee members.
Chair Katie Gilbertson, for the record, I'm not an executive committee member, but I did want to point out that I asked if anybody was interested in doing the Mesquite Works tour. There's a survey out. I can resend it after to the full board. The date so far that's worked for everybody is Tuesday, August 1st. So still working with George Galt on that. He's the chairman of Mesquite Works, but if anybody's interested, they just set up a new Mesquite Works STEAM Center. So it'd be a tour of looking at that. They're a completely nonprofit organization, so it's pretty impressive effort on them. So the board can support by going on a tour.
Excellent. Well, if you would send that survey out one more time.
Yeah.
Since we are only a couple of weeks away, so
Mhm.
we can firm that up and make that happen in some
Yeah.
form or another. Great. Thanks for bringing that up. So before moving on, the chair kindly requests that any member of the executive committee who arrived late after roll call was taken to please identify themselves at this time so you can be marked present.
Mr. Chair, Rob Benner. I came in a couple minutes late. but I've
Thanks,
been-
Rob.
Thank you.
All right, hearing nobody else. Moving on to number 16, members of the public are invited for final comments. Are there any public comments on the telephone or Zoom, Katie? Can you see?
I don't see any.
All right. So hearing no further comments, I appreciate all your participation today, and I hereby move to adjourn this meeting. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Thanks for your hard
Thank
work,
you.
Katie.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank you.
Katie.